In today's brief video, we're going to be talking everything weed and mental health related. We're going to discuss depression, anxiety, psychosis, schizophrenia, disassociation, and much more. As an individual who personally struggled with THC or marijuana addiction, this topic really hits home for me. And I'm going to be sharing parts of my personal story with you guys throughout the duration of today's presentation. Let's jump right into it. Weed use gone wrong. Can weed trigger schizophrenia? I can tell you this much. When it comes to weed induced psychosis, which is a potential symptom of schizophrenia, this is what nightmares are made of when it comes to some of the more serious side effects of cannabis use, or rather cannabis addiction. What we're going to be doing in today's video, guys, is I'm going to be dissecting this article, When Cannabis Use Goes Wrong, Mental Health Side Effects of Cannabis Use That Present to Emergency Room Settings. This article was published in Frontiers of Psychiatry. It's a peer-reviewed article. Okay, so this isn't me saying this stuff. This is what the literature says. And you guys can find links to this article and other resources in the pinned comment, the video description, or the link in my profile. Gone wrong based on what? Well, how did this article find whatever information we're about to discuss? Basically, from July of 2020 to October of 2020, they did a systematic review of all the literature out there on anything involving the words weed, marijuana, or cannabis in emergency room or emergency department visits. So they did an in-depth review of all the published literature on topics in relation to what brings people who smoke cannabis to the emergency room. And before we get into it, one quick disclaimer. They did exclude synthetic cannabis. So I know people are going to come and say, oh no, that's only with synthetic cannabis. This article took that into account. Everything that we're going to talk about today is in regard to good old Delta 9 THC, just regular old-fashioned cannabis, okay? What did they find going through this review? Well, they found a strong association with the development of psychotic disorders, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, as well as suicidal ideation in those patients presenting to the emergency room who consume cannabis on a regular basis. And that's a bulk of what we're going to talk about today. But that doesn't mean that we should neglect other aspects of cannabis addiction or even cannabis consumption that bring people to the ER. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome being an extremely serious condition, lung injuries that we saw with all the eval, the vape products and the pneumonias and the pneumothoraxes, and cardiac dysfunction related to arrhythmias. Now, if we were to go into the health effects of CHS and lung injuries, that could be a PowerPoint on its own, because we could get into malnutrition, we could get into GI disorders and esophageal disorders from hyperemesis or continual vomiting. We could go into bone density loss from malnutrition. I could go on and on about the side effects, but today we're going to focus on the mental health side effects of things. What are the side effects that they see in the ER? And guys, the things that we're going to discuss, this represents about 25 to 35% of all cannabis related ER visits. So of all the people going to the emergency room for cannabis, 25 to 35% of those people are going to have anxiety, suicidal thoughts, psychotic symptoms such as psychosis, depression, and potentially even schizophrenia. And reading what I'm about to read to you guys absolutely terrified me when I saw this in the literature. How wrong can things go when it comes to cannabis consumption, according to the literature, according to the research? Up to 50% of patients with cannabis-related psychotic symptoms presenting to the emergency room requiring subsequent hospitalization will go on to develop schizophrenia at some point in their life. But let me explain what that's saying. 50% of people going to the hospital, to the ER for cannabis-related psychotic disorders or mood disorders. Those who returned for a subsequent follow-up visit to the hospital, they're claiming 50% are going to go on to develop schizophrenia. When we talk about cannabis for mental health, we always talk about how good it is and what a positive thing it is. And we're seeing this being promoted at dispensaries and through social media and through influencers and just through general pop culture. Guys, the evidence is not adding up to this. And I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't know this until recently. I did a video, which I also linked in the video description in the pinned comment, with Dr. Anna Lemke, the head of Stanford Addiction Medicine Treatment Centers, or clinics, I should say, not treatment centers, clinics. And she said blatantly, there is no literature supporting THC consumption for long-term benefit of any mental health disorder. That is based in nothing. Maybe short-term, there's some benefit, but long-term use, chronic use, not looking good, especially when we see a statistic like this. That's scary. What is schizophrenia? Well, it's a mental illness that alters how people think and how they feel and how they behave. People often will lose touch with reality and they'll experience symptoms such as hallucinations, delusions, and very disorganized thinking. It came to my attention recently that a lot of people don't know what hallucinations are. These are things that you can hear, smell, see, taste, or feel that aren't really there. It's all happening in your head. I remember towards the end of my weed addiction, laying in my room getting high off of a dank vape cartridge, having intense hallucinations. And these visual disturbances that I was having, now, whether those were hallucinations or, hallucinations as part of psychosis, I think is hard to say. They went on for months after I finally quit smoking cannabis. And it was not a comfortable feeling. It was not a good time. Delusions, irrational false beliefs. You think you're on a special mission. You think you have superpowers. You think someone else is controlling your thoughts. You become super, super paranoid. I was definitely experiencing delusions, and that I thought I was this really big, business entrepreneur. I had just opened a few businesses at the time when I was struggling with weed addiction. And I thought I was just numero uno when it came to the business world. And literally all that was happening was I was getting stoned every day while I was in the process of losing all my income, all my relationships, wound up having to move back home with family. It got so bad at one point. Really, really delusional. Disassociation, a detached feeling from the world around you. It doesn't feel like things are real anymore. I remember, and I was never stoned during the day, only in the evening hours, but I remember times during the day questioning my reality. It really weird thought. It's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it before. Who is at the most risk? And guys, you can have those things without having schizophrenia. You would want to go get diagnosed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist when it comes to that diagnosis. Adolescents. So the literature shows in this article that people who started using weed at a younger age are going to be more susceptible to developing schizophrenia. People who use daily or almost daily, mind you, we're not talking about all day consumption. We're talking about daily consumption. And for me, I would only smoke maybe 2-3 hits in the evening hours. Yeah, during my weekends, my intake was a lot higher, but just daily or almost daily use puts those people at risk. Now, if you have an adolescent that's doing daily use with high THC products, they are at a statistically significant increased risk for developing one of these mental disorders, whether it be schizophrenia, delusions, psychosis, any of these things. Females also seem to present more often with these problems than males, even though they tend to consume less cannabis. These factors, especially when combined, decrease the average age for the development of mental illness. How sad is that? You spend your whole life working hard. You're going to school, you're working hard, you get your degree, and then boom, in your 30s or your 40s, schizophrenia hits, mental illness hits, severe depression, suicidal ideation, crippling anxiety, depression, things I was dealing with intensely on top of the psychosis and manic behavior. right at a point in my life when my career was starting to take off. How terrible is that? I brought up this photo of this young gentleman here. You can read about him if you type in cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome death. A lot of people say no one's ever died from weed, and that is just simply not true. If we look at the physical consequences of cannabis abuse, there are deaths from weed. There are lung injury related deaths from cannabis consumption. Yes, mostly in black market products, but it does exist. So just throwing that out there, guys. And the point of this is it's not to bash weed, it's not to fearmonger. It's know the risks, know what you're dealing with. Had this younger gentleman or his family known, maybe this could have been prevented. All right. What about some statistics? Should we make it legal? What are we seeing in legal states? For the record, I support legalization. I just do. But what's the data say? Okay, 25 to 30% of all cannabis related ER visits involved anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and psychotic symptoms. This is looking at hospitals throughout Colorado. They were doing studies there. A Colorado study found out of 4 million ER visits, people who presented with cannabis use had a 5 times greater prevalence of mental health diagnoses and mental illness in the coding for the billing on what brings people to the ER. So in a Colorado study where we have legalization, a 5 times greater presentation to the hospital with mental illness and people with cannabis use. Colorado has seen statewide significant increases in cannabis ER visits since legalization. A lot of people say legalize, make it safer. You're going to have less black market products, less hospitalizations. Currently, the literature is stating otherwise. Colorado has seen significantly increased amounts of adolescent cannabis ER visits since legalization. Guys, my company is currently working on a CDC grant in New York State with New York State school systems to start to rapidly raise awareness regarding cannabis use, especially when it comes to adolescents. Cartridges are rampant among our high schools. It's every day I'm seeing TikTok videos of kids greening out or practically overdosing, not dying. I should maybe say rather reaching a state of acute cannabis toxicity on TikTok, YouTube. I've made reaction videos to them before. It is so sad what's going on. And I've said it before in my videos. I'm pro legalization. And the best way to achieve pro legalization is through ongoing education and awareness, something that is deeply lacking right now when it comes to the potential harms of cannabis use. And again, talk about cannabis, you're only going to hear it's a miracle cure for mental health, something that I once was under the impression of myself. A note on suicidal thoughts. 2020 to 2021, there was a 4% increase in suicidal death. 11% of Americans smoke cigarettes. 16% of Americans now smoke weed. Weed is one of the fastest growth used substances right now in the United States. With perceptions of safety, with legalization on a state level and the impending federal level, more people are consuming cannabis. Less people are smoking cigarettes. That's good. More people are consuming cannabis. Now, this is interesting when it comes to suicidal stuff. 74% of people with acute psychiatric symptoms had suicidal ideation, anxiety, and psychotic symptoms, according to one of the studies referenced in this review article that I'm talking about. 74% of people in the hospital with acute psychotic symptoms of cannabis use had suicidal ideation. That's a scary thing when we're seeing an overall rise in suicide trends. Okay. Colorado suicide data shows 77.5% increase in cannabis positive toxicology reports for suicide victims pre-post legalization. So legalization went up, the amount of cannabis found in suicide victims also rose. That's a really terrifying statistic, especially when we're talking about something my company is deeply involved with, youth and suicide prevention and the rising rates of cannabis use. My company is also extremely concerned, and this is a position we're standing firm on right now in high schools, with the association of violence and cannabis use among high school students. And I think we're going to be terrified when the literature starts to come out on some of these more violent high school crimes that we've seen, and toxicology reports with regard to cannabis consumption. I understand people say cannabis makes people mellow, it doesn't make people agitated. And guys, I hate to say it, the literature is saying otherwise. If we look at one of the most violent criminals throughout our history, Pablo Escobar, he was a terrorist, right? He was not only a criminal, he was a domestic terrorist. His drug of choice was cannabis. This was a guy who didn't drink, he didn't smoke. And I would argue, I don't know this, I'm on a side tangent, that Pablo Escobar suffered from cannabis-induced psychosis. That's my guess. 53% of people say marijuana has positive effects on those whom use it, according to one major poll that was run. And I linked all this stuff in the video description. People's perception is overwhelmingly that cannabis has positive effects on mental health. Now, I want to point something out. Obviously, we went through COVID. COVID-induced psychosis and isolation was a risk factor for psychosis. But what happened? A lot of people started to buckle down on cannabis and alcohol consumption throughout COVID. My offices, our one-on-one coaching was booming and continues to boom post-COVID because of this, okay? And what I'm trying to say, guys, is you take what we went through with COVID and the risk of COVID-induced psychosis because of isolation and cutting ourselves off from other people. You take the increased drug consumption. You guys saw the lines at the dispensaries, and what if you saw the data on weed maps and in-home orders for cannabis, you saw the lines at the liquor stores. We are setting ourselves up for a recipe of disaster going forward when it comes to, COVID related illness and future pandemic stuff and addiction. It is not good. And not to mention the opioid epidemic that continues to go on and the amount of deaths we saw with that. What are the other stats saying when it comes to this? What about Canada, where we have legalization? 106 to 186 cannabis attributed cases of schizophrenia per year show up to the hospital in Canada. Now, people say that doesn't sound like a lot, but schizophrenia is a very expensive disease process. And they stated in this article that it has these 186 cases of all the Canada's population has resulted in a measurable burden on the Canadian healthcare system. That's wild. To think that 100-something people a year are developing schizophrenia from cannabis, and that the healthcare system is able to financially measure that burden is just mind-blowing to me. 8% of cannabis ER visits in one Canadian study needed inpatient therapy. Guys, I've worked with several Canadian clients whose children, typically it's a child that they're calling for, are either being admitted to the ER or just getting out of the ER for cannabis-induced psychiatric symptoms such as psychosis, schizophrenia, delusions, hallucinations, suicide attempt, all of these things. 8% of them are needing inpatient therapy while they're there. If you're looking for a reason to quit, protect your brain. You do not want to show up to the ER with cannabis-induced psychosis, guys. I'm telling you, the treatment you're going to get is very underwhelming, especially when it comes to follow-up care and post-treatment. They dope you up. You're out of there on your own afterwards. It's very scary. It's very, very scary. On 4/20, so the weed holiday in Canada, okay, emergency services have to put in place advanced planning for the spike in ER visits that they intend on seeing due to cannabis-induced mental health complications. This is a 10-year study across multiple hospitals in Canada. Let me repeat that. What they found was that on 420, there's a massive spike in cannabis-induced mental health complications across all Canadian hospitals. This is terrifying when 53% of the general population is going around saying weed, THC containing products is a benefit for mental health. Hospital visits are saying otherwise. We're not seeing less hospital visits because of cannabis. We're seeing an increased amount in hospital visits, especially with regard 73% are there. They're 20 to 35% are there because of mental health complications. That's crazy. Cannabis toxicity or poisoning, what's it look like? Agitation and aggression in 22.9% of people, psychosis in 20% of people, anxiety in 20% of people. A European study of 35 cases of cannabis-induced ER visits, of 35 people, 21 were transported by ambulance because it was so severe. 4 were admitted to inpatient therapy. 4 out of 35 cases needed inpatient care because their mental health complications were so severe. That is mind blowing. And guys, it's not shocking. Looking at the cartridges, looking at the lack of regulation on products, looking at now all the variants that you can buy in your random gas station or smoke shop, looking at the really legal high concentration THC, none of this is shocking. But it's good for anxiety, right? This is something that I believed. And breaking through this mentality, this thought process was a crucial step in my quitting. Realizing that the weed was actually making the anxiety worse was like a mind blowing realization and a key part of quitting. Because when it comes to quitting, you have to let go of any perceived benefits, and understanding the facts surrounding cannabis use can help with that. There is little evidence to support weed as an anti-anxiety medication or therapy, okay? Little to no evidence, especially long-term. Long-term, there's none. It says the opposite. One study of ER patients who had used cannabis in the past 30 days found reasons for use included. So they asked patients in the hospital who have used cannabis before. This was a huge study. Why do you use cannabis? 30% said they use it to treat anxiety, even though there's no literature out there on it for that. 17% said for depression. Hey, you're getting CHS, you're getting psychosis, you're getting lung disorders, you're suffering from addiction, potentially one of the worst consequences. The depression's going to get worse. It's all about perception. And right now, the public perception is that cannabis is a benefit for all of these things, when in reality, updated literature 2021, as of right now, we're saying, wait a minute, look at this. No, it's not looking good right now. What about edibles? Does it matter how we consume cannabis? Well, this is fascinating. They studied this in Colorado. 0.32% of total cannabis sales in Colorado from 14 to 16 were edibles. 10% of the ER related visits in Colorado for cannabis induced mental health disorders were from edibles. Okay. Edibles make up 0.32% of total sales in Colorado, yet edibles are bringing in 10% of all cannabis induced mental health disorder conditions to the ER. Significant levels of intoxication, accidental coma, death, and increased risk of psychosis have all been cited in the literature when it comes to cannabis edible use. That's scary. I never liked edibles. Early warning signs. So if you're smoking a lot of weed and you're thinking, is this something I need to be worried about? Well, if you're seeing pre-psychotic or pre-psychosis symptoms, a decline in school or work performance. And guys, listen, we have a lot of high producing people. We have physicians, attorneys, and mostly entrepreneurs. That's who my programs predominantly work with when it's not a student or a parent calling for their child or a student through a school system that's been referred to us. A decline in work doesn't necessarily mean like You could be a super successful person and starting to see a decline in your already high level of success. This isn't referring to people who are like going broke, okay? You could be an A student down to a B student. That's a decline. Difficulty concentrating, feeling suspicious, feeling paranoid. A decline in basic hygiene, right? Is there self-care? Are you brushing your teeth in the morning? Are you brushing your teeth at night? Are you showering regularly? Are you cleaning your clothes, right? Spending lots of time alone, and an overall lack of feeling or very inappropriate strong emotions. I was strong to anger, and I had a lack of empathy throughout my state of psychosis. That was what I had going on, and a number of those other things as well too. Obviously, almost all those other symptoms. Here's the crazy thing, guys. Most people, let's take COVID, they were getting drunk and they were smoking weed. Statistically, the data says that. If you are consuming other drugs, which, mind you, this study separated people going to the hospital into individual groups, people presenting with cannabis and alcohol, just cannabis. I covered, guys, the people going for just cannabis in their system, by the way. So for anyone watching this saying, Dr. Frank, yeah, but they were probably drinking or doing other drugs too. No, they tested them when they went to the hospital. It was just cannabis that we talked about. Now, if you're pounding energy drinks, watching a ton of social media, binging pornography, consuming a lot of nicotine, doing cocaine, doing psychedelics, drinking a lot of alcohol, these things alone, each of those things alone can cause psychosis. You can get psychosis induced from consuming too many energy drinks, period. No other substance, okay? Google it. It's a real thing. Many people, if you're like me, are combining all of those things: weed, energy drinks, alcohol, binging adult media content. You are setting yourself up for a disaster when you hit that next point in your life. If you're 40, maybe it's going to hit when you're 60. If you're 30, maybe it's going to hit when you're 40. If you're 15, it might hit when you're 25 or 30. Protect your brain. Your brain is the only thing you can control in life. And the last thing you want to do is put yourself in a category for increased risk of schizophrenia, hallucinations, delusions, things that we actually kind of start to become out of our control. Now what? I have good news. It does get better. Cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational talk therapy, peer-to-peer work, and above all else, developing a plan to quit. Right now, you can go to the video description or the pinned comment and you can book a one-on-one call where I will work with you to help you quit smoking weed. We will develop a plan. If you're suffering from psychosis, if you're suffering from these symptoms, we will develop a plan to help you. So check that out. Get the free handout on quitting weed if you don't want to do that. You can find it all in the pinned comment in the video description. Now, there's something else to be said. All of the recommended therapies are exactly what the addiction mindset programs provide people. We've combined all of these therapies into one nice little package for you guys, because this is something that I wish I had, because when I went through this, I was seeing different doctors, different therapists, different nutritionists, different this and that. So we put it all in one space for you guys. And if you don't want to pursue any of that, just go to the next video where I talk a little bit more about psychosis and how to overcome it. I'll see you guys there.